The Cobra is an absolute menace in World of Tanks, but just how much of a menace is this vehicle? And with its really kind of almost OP HESH ammo that this vehicle gets, is it actually that bad? And are people abusing this vehicle to come out with some amazing results? And today's couple of replays are going to showcase exactly that, where people have these outrageous games where the damage per minute of the vehicle can be used to great effect, playing up against tier 10 vehicles, because this is a tier 9, of course, and it has the HESH ammo, which significantly increases the damage per minute. Of course, you do sacrifice the penetration to be able to get the extra alpha damage, and so yes, with 4 shells of 490 alpha, you can do up to, I believe, 1960 damage in all of your shells combined, so you can take out most vehicles within World of Tanks with this tank. Now, the vehicle in general is a really good one, because not only do you have the HESH ammo, but you also have the flexibility that comes with the gun depression that this vehicle gets, as well as being able to mobilize around the map, move around, and put yourself in a position where you can constantly use those 4 shells in your magazine to be able to deal damage constantly throughout the game. So as soon as you've reloaded, you can output your damage, and here you're seeing how quickly you can tear apart vehicles. The Leopard 1 on the enemy team couldn't even stand a chance, of course, that being a vehicle that has okay armor, but certainly not enough to hold up against 210 pen, and when you're dealing 490 every second or so, yeah, that can get very dangerous for a lot of the lightly armoured vehicles on the enemy team, and even some of the heavily armoured vehicles. If you can get around the side of them, or you can get around the rear of the vehicles, then yeah, 210mm is more than enough to do that. And even if you're coming up against some of the same tier heavy tanks, you can still go through things like the lower plate and the weak points with the Cobra. Now then, of course, finding himself a batch at 25T AP to farm, along with an object of 140 who's come outside on. Yeah, it's pretty nice, and shaping up to be a very good game, with 3,405 damage done within the first 3 minutes of the game, which can't really be said for a lot of these medium vehicles, I guess, within World of Tanks. I mean, yes, you can usually deal quite a lot of damage over the course of the game, but it relies upon using your damage per minute throughout the entirety of the game, not chunking away nearly 2,000 damage in one encounter, which you can do with the Cobra. And that's why this thing is just something completely bizarre to World of Tanks. It's just something that is not generally a type of vehicle that you see within the game, and why it's kind of maybe more unique and novel than you might expect from other vehicles within the game. So, contrary to what you might believe about something like the Cobra, this vehicle has that intricate reload that means that within about 4 seconds you're able to deal all of your shells of damage, up to nearly 2,000 damage in one go. And you saw the hit points of the Object 263 there be removed very quickly, and this is something that I always think the Cobra can do so well on, and why people who are obviously good players, like you're seeing here with 2 marks of excellence on the vehicle, are players to be feared in this sort of matchup. Now remember, to be able to actually earn the Cobra, you have to complete a ton of the missions. It is the latest kind of mission vehicle that you can pick up, so you've got to be hot on it with regards to the Battle Pass to pick up the Battle Pass points, to be able to then spend 24 to be able to pick up this vehicle. Of course, that may change as the Battle Passes go on, I have no idea, but we'll have to wait and see as to how that goes. But of course, you can always try and get this vehicle as quickly as possible right now if you have any points left to spare. Otherwise, yeah, it's looking like you'll only be coming up against this vehicle. Now, from a perspective of coming up against the Cobra, what can you do to counteract this vehicle? Well, there are a few things that you can do, and of course the obvious one is to rush it once you know it's fired. I mean, that is literally the most basic thing in World of Tanks with regards to autoloaders. If you know that they fired all your shells, then you can rush them Granted, if you can do it safely and not just YOLO through the middle of the map to try and take out someone, which you may or may not do. But the other thing is that the turret armor of this vehicle is not particularly amazing. It is better than maybe you would expect from a tank that can deal 2,000 damage in one go, but it's not enough to hold up against most vehicles in the game, so you've got to be a little bit careful with regards to coming up against this vehicle if you're wanting to reliably pen things. But one thing you don't have to worry about is a Rhinoceronte's backside, and with just 4 shells onto the tier 10 heavy vehicle, yes, the entirety of his hit points removed within one single clip. And this is why it's so powerful within the game, and why I feel like it's just a little bit overpowered in some scenarios. I'm not saying that overall this vehicle is the most outrageous vehicle in the game and that it's going to single-handedly win you games, but I mean it can do 100%, but overall maybe not the most OP, but in my opinion definitely something that was not very well thought out, since you think of things like the FV215B, which was supposedly meant to be fairly trash with the reduced Hesh pen, and being able to deal with the high amounts of damage that obviously it can do. And then you look at the Cobra, which is far more reliable to be able to get damage, and yeah, this thing has almost the same alpha damage and actually has more than the FV215B or the FV4005. And if you've enjoyed this video so far, and this analysis of the Cobra, then maybe you want to stick around and actually have a look at some other gameplays. And we've got plenty more on the channel, and I'm going to be doing a whole probably like 25 more videos in the month of September, so you can stay tuned to see some more outstanding replays. Of if you've got any replays in particular you want to showcase, then please go ahead and submit them to the inbox and the email down below if you're interested in doing that, and maybe it will be featured as part of one of these videos as well. But I digress. What's happening within this game? Well, you've just seen that his teammate here, who he was platooned up with, and he was indeed in the 50 TP, the tier 9 Polish heavy tank, just got taken out. So now it's a case of, what do you do in this sort of scenario when you've got a Leopard 1, a Foch, a Grilla, a Waffenträger, Alpha Panzer IV, and of course most of them will outspot the Cobra. But granted, the Cobra doesn't have the worst view range in the game. It's just not optimal for probably what you want. Now, the Grilla gets spotted, but unfortunately out of the view range, and when he does come into the view range, he does get taken out. 531 damage done there with a lovely high roll with the Hesh ammunition of this thing. So really, really nice to see. Of course, the Leopard 1 and the Waffenträger Panzer IV, both vehicles that can be penned with the Hesh rounds of this. So it's just a case of waiting until they get spotted by potentially the WZ-111-5A and the WZ-111-5A on the other side, or the Waffle Panzer IV. And when that eventually happens, it's going to be farming simulator, much like this is in the game. And of course, this is a farmer. It genuinely can farm the opponents so well. And you're seeing here, unfortunately, the accuracy coming into play, and unfortunately, he only manages to pick up 1 out of 3 shells there. And there's a Foch 155 who is sitting down in front of him and is the last vehicle left alive. He fires his shell and finishes off the WZ-111-5A on his friendly team. And now it's just a case of waiting that long reload, and this is the TikTok element where you're just sat there waiting and hoping that your opponents wouldn't rush you. For example, if you were playing up against other medium tanks at tier 9, they might just come around now that they know that you're reloading, farm you for all of your hit points, and then you can't use the OP farming mechanic that is this auto-loading Hesh rounds. So it's kind of disappointing, but obviously the Foch is only on another 70 damage, so that's the maximum you can get. But because it's Hesh as well, or at least that one wasn't, that was heat, but the previous rounds would have finished off the Foch 155 really, really easily. But a great round of World of Tanks. Let's jump into the next one to see if you can continue playing in a vehicle like this and do as well. Now then, the next replay that we have is, of course, on El Haloof. And this is a almost perfect map because it's a poke trade deal your damage and then leave again map, which means that you can poke around, you can club someone, and then you can move back down the hill or whatever it might be to be able to come away with the victories. And of course, with the HESH rounds that most people will fire in this vehicle, you can really come away with clubbing a lot of the tier 10s, and that is all what the Cobra is about. It's about clubbing, basically just farming up the tier 10 vehicles. And you saw there the VZ55, which was the feature in yesterday's video. If you haven't watched that, I highly recommend you go and see how a VZ55 carved its way through the enemy team. But regardless of that, we're seeing how the Cobra can even carve apart vehicles that are primarily pretty strong within the game, and that is what this vehicle can offer you. Remember that there are certain scenarios where maybe you come up against the front of the VZ and you've only got HESH loaded, then you're going to only be doing 50 damage per shell, which is definitely a problem, especially when the DPM of this vehicle isn't fantastic. You've got 2,200 damage, but remember, it's quite effective in terms of how the DPM works on this vehicle. So this is what it's all about, and hoping that opponents make a slight mistake where you can maximize on it and you can come away dealing a ton of damage whilst also not risking a whole lot. And it's the vehicle that you'll find a lot of the best players like using, because they can poke around a corner, they can kind of put their middle finger up to people, I suppose, and say you're just a piece of shit, like why have you YOLO'd me, and then they end up getting 2,000 damage dished out to whoever it is that YOLO'd. So that's what the Cobra is all about, and of course we all love it when you club someone that thought that they were going to have a fantastic time YOLOing you, and then you actually give them the stick and say, nah, actually get back down in your little hole from what you came. So that's what the Cobra always offers, and I highly recommend anyone, if you've got the points from the Battle Pass, to pick this vehicle up, because there is no other tank that you'd be able to deal 1,500 damage to the side of an AMX at tier 9 in such quick fashion, and without having to kind of sacrifice a ton of other things within the game to come away with such a result. So it's really nice to see that this vehicle is doing just that. And you can see here, escaping using the mobility of the tank, since you can go about 35 in most cases, and mainly faster if you do get up to a top speed of, I believe, 40 kilometers an hour, which is really nice. Now then, finding his next victim, the T95, having trouble with the first shell to pen, but having known his mistake, I guess, with the first one, he then counteracts it and charges the T95 with the lovely 1,200 hit point tax from his absolutely YOLO play into the Tortoise. Yes, he finishes off the Tortoise, but a terrible idea to YOLO into him, subsequently losing, what, like 90% of his hit points, if not more? Yeah, I wouldn't have wanted that trade if I was the T95. Obviously, T95 looks like he's kind of forgotten about the Cobra and just sat there waiting for the inevitable, where the Cobra is fully reloaded. Now, talking about the Cobra's reload, you're looking at 50 seconds, or maybe like 45 if you've got some of the perks and stuff like that. I think the minimum reload you can have with this vehicle, if you're using all of the damage per minute buffs and everything that can boost it up, is 43.7 seconds, or somewhere in that region. So it's it definitely is a long time, and if people know that, then you're not gonna have a fun time at all. This replay showcasing, of course, 5,058 damage already, and you're seeing here just the rounds flying into the opponents. Talking about the rounds flying into the opponents, they're not slow. These rounds can go 1,165 meters a second, which means that, yes, they are kind of comparable to some of the APCR rounds you might see on some vehicles. No, not all of them, granted, but considering that the heat rounds that this vehicle gets as the kind of main AP equivalent, if that makes sense, is 793. That's nearly 1.5 times more with the HESH round, so they're a lot quicker, more reliable to hit your opponents, and so you can come away with more damage more reliably, I would say, with the HESH rounds if you're just loading full of them. There are some scenarios where you'd want to be firing the heat rounds, but for the most part the HESH rounds are really where it's at. Unfortunately for the T110E4, the rear armour is definitely not where it's at for the Cobra. So he chunks away almost 2,000 hit points off of the E4 and finishes him off. So it's lovely work there from the Cobra. Did low roll the second shell, however, by almost 100. Not particularly amazing. So when the enemy team have the 2-tank advantage like you're seeing here, it's imperatively that you don't get caught out by the opponents, because remember, the Cobra doesn't really have armour, and in fact you're looking at very, very minimal amounts of armour wherever it might be on this vehicle. The side armour is absolute paper, which means most tanks can actually go through the side of your vehicle without even requiring to actually pen. So it's a little bit disappointing when you see a lot of players kind of YOLOing in with this vehicle, dumping out the 2,000 damage, and then ending up thinking, well, I've got 50-second reload where I'm doing absolutely jack all. So this is the sort of thing that you don't want to be doing, and you should always try and remain as far away from your opponents as possible as you move on throughout the game, because you want that little bit of leeway where you can kind of find out where your opponents are and then deal with how the situation comes. I'm not saying you should camp in this vehicle, far from it. It's not what you want to be doing, but what you definitely want to be doing is keeping a bit of distance so it gives you that time to react to how the game is going to be played, because when you've got 47 seconds to reload, you want to know where you should be at that 47-second mark to be able to kind of deal with whatever's left on the enemy team after you subsequently fire all 4 of your rounds. So this is really, really crucial in terms of coming away with a victory. Now, unfortunately for the STRV, that has absolutely no armour in the side, and it's a vehicle that can be overmatched by a lot of vehicles if they have very, very, very high penetration rounds. But for the most part, the STRV 103B can just sit in front of people. And at the moment, you're seeing the Cobra just basically running rings around the STRV, keeping him in place, and then kind of retreating back to try and get a shot on what some may say as the pesky little French light tank, the AMX 1390. Now, the 1390 is completely out of rounds at this point, so he has dumped off all 4 rounds, successfully penetrating the Cobra every single time. And yeah, it's that's the sort of scenario that you find disappointing with the vehicle, because it's really, really good in some cases, and of course showcasing some of the best games in the Cobra can be a little bit, I guess, not the truth about the vehicle in general, because there are some weak points, and of course you saw there when people do actually YOLO you or they have a shot on you, like 99% of the time it's going to pen, even if you are showcasing some of the best armour on maybe the turret of the vehicle. Then yeah, it can definitely not be so much fun. Now, the Tortoise here does finish off the Cobra, but he did munch through a bit of the hit points. At that point of meeting the Cobra, it might have been worth just continuing to drive on, but I'm not the one with 8,500 damage within about 10 minutes of the game starting. So there is something that can be said from playing the Cobra, whether you're a good, a bad, or someone that's been playing World of Tanks for 12 years or however long you might have been playing the game. And of course, hopefully my analysis of the tank was enjoyable for you to have a look at. Don't forget that if you want to check out some other amazing replays where we go through all of the various different things that might happen, then go check out some of the videos that are on screen right now. Other than that, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I hope you join me in the next one. Goodbye.